thank you all who made it here for the first session of the day. Appreciate that. I'm going to talk a little bit about something that sounds very academic, but I hope to make it entertaining for you. One of the things that you're going to hopefully get out of this, like we all want to say, yeah, people enjoyed the presentation, but really what I'm looking for is that you actually do something from this. Do something with respect to like adding in something that I think is missing. So my background, and if people were to ask, what am I? What is my profession, right? Yeah, I've been a CISO, a public company CISO for 15 years, but I'm really a systems engineer. That's about all there was back a while ago, right? So I was stationed down at Moffett Field, avionics tech, enlisted in the Navy, maybe dating myself a little bit, USSR, so pre the Berlin Wall. And then did some carrier duty down in San Diego, and then got out and went to work at CSC, like many, consulting, ended up at DISA for a long time. And so when I did do the transition into cybersecurity, this is like the mid-90s. And so I just happened to have actually what I think is one of the founding women of cybersecurity, which almost no one talks about or recognizes today, Commander Stark. Candace Stark wrote 2 of the Rainbow series. If you don't know what the Rainbow series is, it's kind of the foundation or base framework that we all started to build our profession from, right, in our practices. And these are the things that everybody knew. When I was stationed at Moffett Field, this was about a year after Cliff Stoll, right? And if you haven't read Cuckoo's Egg, you need to read it, because even reading it today, you will learn about your profession. How many hours do they say it takes to become an expert in something? 10,000 hours. Now there are 10 domains, divide it any way you want to, but let's say there's 10 domains in cybersecurity. Are we going to spend 50 years and then be deemed an expert? And what happens if you prioritize the first 10,000 hours with respect to one area? By the time you get to the end, you're dated, right? So how do you become an expert in all of this? Well, the reason that I want to tell you this is because what I try to do is change the way I think about cybersecurity and my role. What I really believe we are is investors. Like when you get to the point of being a CISO, you are an investor. When you're working on a team, you're investing what is the most important thing, and that is your time. And so the question is, how do you maintain the investment that you've made, that your predecessors have made? And what I'm going to tell you is, it occurred to me that I wasn't maintaining it because I was missing a process. And so that's what this is about. It's about maintaining the investment that you've made in the past. Now, one of the things that I didn't realize, and this is like, because you start to learn this stuff and you make mistakes or you just kind of go along with the status quo, you tend not to challenge the things that you're doing. Well, what I think an expert is one that actually does it long enough that they can look back and say, shit, I did that wrong, right? Or I wasn't thinking about it right. And so you have the freedom to do that. And so you stay in it long enough, this is what you're going to do. Now, I'm going to say some things that are going to be like, yeah, that makes sense. Somewhere a couple days from now, you're going to realize that I challenged some other things, and then you're going to be like, no, that's not right. Go back and look at the recording. The best way to describe it is, I believe security is art, not science, but I apply what is one of the most elegant things in science field, which is test it, come up with a hypothesis, and then try to prove it wrong. What I want you all to do is try to prove me wrong. If you can't prove me wrong, we'll have debate about it. But if you can't prove me wrong, maybe I'm right, okay? So I'll say things like, for instance, this is part emotional. I don't believe you should have undergrad programs for cybersecurity. Ooh, I don't believe we have a shortage of cybersecurity professionals. Okay, I'll back those 2 up really quickly, and this will be recorded. We have a distribution problem with respect to cybersecurity. We have too many people in certain areas or working for certain companies that leaves our ecosystem vulnerable. The reason that I don't think that we should have an undergrad program, and by the way, the ones that are out there, even kids that I may know, keep doing it. But The reason that I don't think that we should have undergrad programs is because most of the time you haven't figured out that this is your passion. And you better be passionate about this to work inside of a company, because you're almost against everybody in a sense, and it's very tough. We should have graduate programs. I'll tell you really though why I don't think we should have undergrad programs and more kids being pushed into cybersecurity right off the bat. And this is just kind of an emotional, I'll admit to that. And that is, that just tells me that criminals are having a greater impact on our society. Go become builders. They're taking production capability. They're taking smart young brains who could be solving problems out of our workforce. But if somewhere along the way your house is robbed or your grandmother is defrauded and that makes you mad, then get into cybersecurity. Okay, so what do we do in cybersecurity? Here's something else. I'd like to keep this simple, and I was confused for a long time. We only have 2 objectives until you're a CISO in cybersecurity. Everything that you do either reduces, and it can do both, reduces the probability of an intrusion or loss event, or it reduces time to discover. So as an investor, I'm going to invest an action, labor, prioritization in one of those 2 areas. There's a third, as you get into a CISO, you have a third responsibility, and that is to protect directors and officers by creating a defensible position with respect to the investment. That's a talk for a different time, but this is about investing in reducing time to discover or reducing the likelihood of an intrusion. Both of those lead to a reduction in consequence. Okay, if you catch it fast enough, you don't even need controls. You do, but you don't even need controls. If you catch it, the moment that somebody comes in and you shut it down, the moment that somebody comes in, same result, right? No consequence. So I've worked in financial services as a public company CISO for 12 years at one company, consulting, and then at an airline. Vastly different organizations. And yes, like all of us, what I was worried about is the consequence, which is reputation damage, financial, but that's not what's prioritized in airlines and maybe healthcare. It's human life. So we have to think about things differently. So I started to look at the controls. Okay, what's a control? And by the way, here's another thing. One of the most important jobs that you can do as you move up your career is ignore, is find out what not to do. Like all that noise that's on the expo floor, all the noise from Gartner, it's all noise. If you can't explain it without using an acronym, right, then you shouldn't be doing it. Okay, so from that standpoint, when we try to think about the problems that we have, right, and what we're doing, and you hear this, we set controls. So what's a control? Think about it as a blocking action. Could be. Possibly could be even allow, if you're doing some kind of like allow listing. But a control in this discussion is also things like a log feed, right? What I'm going to, and what I've said, by the way, so far, undermines every framework that compliance is built on. The reason is because they're not biased right. Most of the frameworks, 27001, 2, Annex A, controls, they're biased towards reducing the probability of a loss event. They're not reducing time to discover. A little bit is changing, and there's a few more coming on. How long did it take OWASP to create one of the 10 that was related to detection? 2017. So we haven't been investing correctly. But let's just say the broader definition of controls here, as I'm talking about it, is the actions that you take such that you do blocking, but it could actually be things that you discover with respect to your threat hunts that maybe help you find something. So I might have been missing DNS logs for a period of time. I might not have all of the fields necessary in my EDR, my endpoint detection, that actually allow me to figure out user behavior or very specific cases. So those are important here. So I walk in, we all do, almost nobody creates a security program from the ground up, right? Our predecessor invested. You might not agree with it, but they invested. My investment I can describe to you that was made prior to me, for instance, in maybe one company, not to be named, was an external firewall. The external firewall had, let's say it had probably 5,000 ingress rules. One firewall from external, right, into a service DMZ. 5,000 rules. Through diligent work with engineering, some of the top engineers, at some point we were going to do a conversion on the platforms. We got it down to 3,500. Great. All right. Do they work? I don't know. Are they all necessary? I don't know. I said, what are you guys evaluating? Oh, hit count, whatever. That's not necessarily what's important. So from a controls perspective, think about controls in this discussion, and what I'm pointing out here is something that's literally missing. So prior to 2005, there used to be the attribution to intrusions. It was in this category called human error. We don't drop it into that anymore. But that was kind of the first thing that I started thinking, what the hell is that? That's really broad. Well, let's think about it this way, is that you invest in controls, but sometimes they don't work. Okay. I want to mention this really quick. Everybody knows the codex for cognitive biases? Okay, so we generally, by and large, have 200, I think it's 190 to 220 cognitive biases. One of them, these are things that we did not evolve to be able to handle in modern environment. Large data sets. But there's also things, and by the way, they're not all bad. They actually allowed us to survive in the right environments. But one of them might be recency bias. We tend to over-prioritize things that happened in the recent past, right? And so this is where possibly algorithms help us, right? So we're looking for solutions to this. But these cognitive biases play into what I'm terming is basically, and it was my own acknowledgement of it, is that I had false confidence, right? My assumptions were incorrect over time. And these things, when you do a retrospective or a postmortem on an intrusion, what happens? Man, even if you spend a year, 2 years in it, right, really trying to get down to the fine details, right, you're going to get back to many times, something wasn't working during that time. We had thought about it, we put it in place, and it wasn't working, right? And so then that got me into, well, okay, I'm going to have to mention one thing here. It might help you to attribute it to a company, but for the longest time in most of my career, there was a negative connotation associated with bright, shiny object. Everybody heard that? I had to accept, though, that I walked into a company where that is part of the DNA. That's actually what made them special. And so how do you adapt to that? You recognize that there is going to be a lot of change going on. And then I realized, there's change going on, and the change is impacting what's happening and the probability that my guesses are wrong. So rate of control degradation, I'd love to be able to spit out a single mathematical function for you. What I'm going to talk about is that it's dependent on the number of very specific factors inside of your environment. And this is not just about the negative associated with this. I just happen to say that maybe in the last 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, we actually have a way to do something about this. So incorrect identification of controls. So this is misplaced confidence. So you set a firewall rule, and what happens? There's a precedent order. And lo and behold, the rules there Compliance may be even verifying that it's there, but that doesn't mean it functions that way. And so what happens is that the session comes in and it never makes it down there. It's allowed by something else. And that is not because a human made a mistake. That is just a byproduct of change. Could somebody have thought about it? Yes. But I'm not going to point the finger at anybody and say, your fault. We can talk about it, but the real thing is that we're missing a backup process there, right? We shouldn't just make an assumption that things work forever. You put it in, you buy a car, and it's going to work forever. No, it doesn't work that way. You invest time. You go through a threat hunt. You get a TTP from I'll try not to use acronyms. You get intelligence on a tactic or technique that's used. It was hard fought to get this. You do a hunt. You put in a detection for it. You put in a block for it. A lot of labor was spent in this. And then a year rolls around and what you put in doesn't work. But it's necessary because they're using and they're trying to penetrate with things from the past. By the way, I apologize, I'm terrible with slides. I tend to talk better than I probably do with creating graphics, but you can go back and look at these. So what are the things that affect your confidence level with respect to controls? It's the rate of change. And this is the rate of change in your network structure. So once you start to move up into companies that you're responsible for security programs for, you tend to get past the point where your brain can think about or humanize or whatever you want to think about every asset. So you start to get around 75,000 assets, you start to get 20,000, 30,000 employees, 300,000 employees, and all of a sudden you just can't humanize the people behind those sessions. You can't think about the processes. It's just too complicated for all of us, and there's no shame to admit that. So the things that you have to do is you have to build algorithms. You have to build sorting even in your own mind. And so from the standpoint of change, you've got application changes. You've got firewall changes, network changes. You've got, could be underlying vendors that are swapped out, that are control points. It could be your entire IAM. Like one of those could underpin all of the work done in the past, all of the controls. Do you start from scratch at that point? Do you invalidate everything that you've done in the past? No. There's a different approach to it. So those frequencies are something that you can put in, but regardless, what you're going to see is when should you have confidence that a control works? Go ahead. That's it. See, this is all common sense. You know it, right? The only time you should have confidence is the moment that it's put in and it's tested and the team gives you a thumbs up. Every change that happens after that, change boards once a week, every 2-week agile releases, they get downgraded. Your confidence should go down. What I'm telling you and what I'm going to propose is that you acknowledge that and you invest in a process. And the reason that you invest in the process is to protect your investment. So if you're in a small company, this is achievable on spreadsheets. If you're in a large company, it is absolutely not. I can't share, full details specific to what, what's possible, but I can tell you this. There are vendor products out there. I'll give credit to one, Attack IQ. But even these products that we use, and I'll tell you how we use it in a second, but even these products that we use, if you're watching this, if you're or listening to this, if you're a product owner, you're going to have to add features or UI. If you're a CEO, you're going to have to invest a little bit in this area. If you want to capture the revenue associated with solving this problem, you're probably going to have to modify your product some. But what we need is an inventory of these controls. So imagine firewall rules. Imagine VLAN rules. Imagine log feeds, so forth and so on. Huge, vast number. It seems incredible when you try to think about actually writing this stuff down, but I'm going to tell you a different approach to this. And it's like this. In the past, if you wanted to try to test these and have confidence again, confidence like the day you released it, you have to test it. So if you go about testing it, that means that you would have to what? Hand test with an attack that matches up with what it's supposed to block? Wow. That's a lot. We barely can have red team. We're sharing red team. Remember, we have a distribution problem. We're sharing red team members, right? That was pretty tough in the past. Are we going to take every blue team member who's aspiring to be an attacker and train them? Then who's going to maintain the systems? What we have to do is we have to empower the blue team, the maintainers, the operators, with the tools and the expertise, but that expertise can't come at a cost. It's got to be, I'm sorry to say, it's got to be more a little bit point and click. And so what happened is we started doing automated testing, very sophisticated testing. We're not talking about Metasploit, deliver it, craft your own test. We're talking about like very sophisticated security tests. So if you're a creator of these automated test programs, you've got task number 1 done. What's task number 2? Task number 2 is to actually create emulation plans that match up with the TTPs that are changing based on the threat actors that are actually using these techniques every day. Then you've got to help your customers who are in verticals where the threat actor is actually targeting them with these TTPs, right? But after that, what you have to do is you have to allow the end user to actually modify the emulation plans. Right? Put the power. I'm not saying you're never going to say that you know what every threat actor is doing. That's just not feasible. You may think you do, but I'm telling you that the hard work that's done by NFC, National Cyber Forensics Training Association, that's done by the ISACs, that's done by these very advanced teams in Fortune 100s and even below, they know things you don't know. So at least think about it this way. You're going to create a pro feature in this product that's going to allow the teams to modify the emulation plans. Now the reason is because what you're going to do then is map the controls that should be necessary to successfully block or react in the way that you want it to that test. And then you're going to run the test at unscheduled times. And every time you run a test, and a block, a log entry, a trigger, an alert is created, you map that back to your control matrix and you move it up to the top and give it confidence. Now, how often, or down, which most of the time happens, which is not a bad thing. That tells you, like things going wrong are almost as valuable as things going right? It tells you that you've got to solve a problem, and then you've got to look back and maybe do education on the way that the new firewall structure is, or the new VLAN structure, or whatever else, or they've got to rebuild the new infrastructure that was replaced with the old rules. Whatever it is, you'll have a way to actually self-heal and correct, but you have to have this process. So you put this process in your organization. Doesn't exist today. I'll give you a benefit. Here's a selling feature for this, in addition to the whole investment thing if you don't buy it. For a long time, many of us, and I even see a few here, worked in compliance. Compliance is not security. Even security compliance is not security, right? It's a set of, I love how you describe it, table stakes, right? It's about really improving to a point where then you become more of the need of an artist with respect to defending against specific threat actors. But you get your security program up. You have justification for your security program. We all realize that doing compliance once a year, whatever period, it ends up that we fall apart in the middle like our evidence isn't there or whatever else. So then the concept of continuous compliance came out. That really never worked. What I'm going to tell you is that continuous compliance is not worth investing in. What's worth investing in is this process, which is confidence that your controls work. So you're basically, somebody come up with a moniker for this, please. What you're doing is you're creating a process which addresses rate of control degradation. And so what you're doing is you're using automation, you're creating these programs, you're creating the programs to test the control sets, to regain confidence in them so that the time period where your confidence should be challenged is only between the tests. And so instead of it dropping off, all of a sudden it becomes flat. And then we can start doing things new. We can put new detections in, new tripwires, we can put new blocking in, but we also have confidence that the stuff in the past worked, right? This is going to bring, I think, the value to the teams that continuous compliance was going to try to do, but it's going to put it in the hands of the blue team. And I think what's going to happen is they're going to learn the value of the things that they do. In fact, I've seen it. They learn the value of the things that they do each day. Because sometimes you forget, like, is it worth going through a change board? Is it worth arguing with IT about doing X, right? All of a sudden, they have a test. They run the test. They see what the test does, and all of a sudden, they can put a story together and say, you know, this is what it's blocking. And so they're telling people who are not in cyber, not in security, and all of a sudden, wow, they become an advocate. They become an evangelist. Everybody on the team becomes an evangelist. So it's one of those things that, you know, for the most part, is worth it. Now, you're probably saying, well, how many tests would you have to run for an organization that has 75,000 assets, 30, even 50,000 employees, right? It would be a lot. I admit that. So what do you do? You know, this is where, you know, better people have come up with ideas about how to organize and prioritize. I think one of our jobs as leaders, any place within the organization, is to really figure out how you want to prioritize and see whether, you know, it works. If it doesn't work, then change it. If other people have ideas about it, then do that. But the one thing that I constantly go back to and I challenge within myself is, like, let's use the acronyms for instance. You know, is Gartner or anybody who's creating these acronyms and driving product owners to create features, are they creating value in the industry? Okay, I'll challenge you with just asking yourself a question that I think you can repeat. Will a criminal, somebody with criminal intent, not break into a company because they see they have a SOAR? Oh, or I'm not going to break into that company because they have an MDR. Or, oh my gosh, zero trust, I won't go anywhere near them. Do they care about that? Yeah. So put the question in, what does the criminal, what's going to change their behavior? Right? And so our job as cybersecurity professionals is a little different than most. Okay, and I'll tell you this, we are the only ones inside of a company that are paid to make somebody else's life miserable. It's the criminal, not the employees. Okay, quick. So if it's the criminal, if we're trying to make their job more difficult, then should we become MBAs? Well, you could, but I'll tell you that what we should do is be the reverse of an MBA. We should figure out how to take organizations apart, to drive up costs. And so our job is to drive up cost, labor, time value proposition in the criminals organization. So criminality, right, is a business, and we have to undermine it. That's our job. So we make things more difficult. We change the perception of value, all of those kind of things. Okay. So if you buy off on what I said about we only do two things, right? Our objectives are invest, reduce the probability of of an intrusion or an exfiltration or any phase in MITRE ATT&CK, or reduce time to discover, then number one is where we're all falling short, by and large. And that is, we're not saving the right amount of log data to make our threat hunts, to raise the efficacy of our threat hunts. We're not saving the right data to trigger alerts, by and large. And so if you agree with that, or if you look in your own organization and either the data doesn't go back far enough or you're missing components, it's not your fault. I'll tell you whose fault it is. It's the investment community. Sorry, investment community. Remember, how did you buy Splunk when it first came out? It was free. And then what happened? You paid by CPU. And then I got really upset with their leadership, which I'm wrong as a capitalist, I'll have to admit. I didn't want them to charge based on volume, because I felt it was against what we were all trying to do as a collective against criminality, which is it disincentivized us to keep log data that we know is important, or that we don't know, but it is important and we'll figure it out later. So the market is what caused this problem because of the volumetric pricing associated with log retention, log access, log movement. So when you look at your controls, take all of your logs, prioritize those as controls. Make sure every one of those at least is tested on the most frequent test basis, and prioritize that on your sheet. Take the emulation plans and link them in there. If there's overlap, fine, there's overlap. But you can't let that one miss. Okay, this number 2 sounds like recency bias. But I always, listen, we are only, I'm sorry for compliance folks because this isn't true, and those that are in heavily regulated environments. By and large, we are only doing what we're doing because of criminality. So don't forget that. From that standpoint, what is their behavior? Well, when they get something working, right, they're going to retry. They're going to redo it against others. Some of them, crime of opportunity, are trying stuff from the past. So you've got to worry about crime of opportunity first. If you're a small company, don't be burned by just somebody stumbling on your environment, right? Make them work for it. That's your job. So address crime of opportunity first, and then address the threat actors who think that your industry has value and they're targeting it. So if they're coming in and you're sharing it in the ISACs, then take those, prioritize those in your threat hunt, obviously, prioritize those in your control matrix, and make sure that those are tested. Eventually, they'll become old attacks, but it'll take quite a while for those to become old attacks. Then start working down the list with respect to those attack patterns which you know the broader industry is seeing. Now, the reason that you prioritize those is mainly because crime of opportunity, but there are some of us that realize that our calculations in our brain are based on how much should we invest based on the threat that we have, broader. So it's threat scenarios, it's threat actors. Okay, well what's behind that truly is humans. Now, they may be coming after you because of the real value that you have inside, or they may be coming after you because of perceived value. It might be totally wrong. Every time your team, your executive team, goes to marketing and releases a public or market message, you possibly are changing somebody's perception of value. Every time there's a press release that's positive for your company, you're changing the perception of value possibly. And so this stuff is happening outside of our control all of the time. And so we have to be, at least figure out that maybe somebody new is going to come after us, or one group that's been focused on certain industry may come after another. In critical infrastructure, right, or aviation, energy, all of those things, right? Geopolitics. We don't control that. It doesn't make sense to cry about what's going on. It'd be great if this all wasn't happening. But the thing is that it's outside of our control. And so all of a sudden we're bringing in nation states, that are possibly coming into us. And so constantly things are changing, techniques are changing, but work in this order, right? Log feeds and evidence associated with increasing the efficacy of your threat hunts, of your detections, prioritize those. Then go to the most recent attack patterns that are coming out and prioritize all of those, and then start working backwards with respect to the ones that are most successful based on whatever, Mandiant reports, blah, 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 okay, in the broader sector. Emulation plans. If you're going to bring in something like this automated testing, Attack IQ as an example, you're going to have help. Is it worth investing in your staff to actually learn how to create these emulation plans? I believe it is. Like, if there's any one thing that's probably good for your team that's going to maybe incentivize them to learn new skills, it might be just the modification of these emulation plans. Then the mapping of the controls basically is just the acknowledgement that they're important, and you have expectations that certain things are supposed to happen. So you build this process in the end, and you take the automated tools, you modify the emulation plans, and then you have a matrix. So for all the CISOs out there, I don't believe that there's a common set of metrics that we're supposed to be reporting on. But imagine one that says all the investment the company has made in the past has still value. And so what you're reporting on is the efficacy of controls that exist. There's a bunch of reporting with respect to improving detection that you can do with the same tools. But one of the things that you're going to get very specifically is the ability to actually report on, hey, these things are still working. Yeah, we had a breakdown, but guess what? We got it back up, and that hasn't repeated for a while. So you have a set of metrics that say, hey, people, audit committee, you're mostly financially mindset, you're thinking about past investment, we're maintaining investment. So to me, this is a process put in place, double checks you, makes sure that your assumptions are correct, and gives the executive team, an understanding of how investment maintains. Looks like we're missing a C on MITRE ATT&CK. MITRE ATT&CK is probably one of the best things that's come out. There's a lot of frameworks out there that I learned in the past, a lot of acronyms. They've fallen by the wayside. Was it wasted time? Probably not. But MITRE ATT&CK framework, love it. It's a great way to communicate. All of the products that are out there should actually use it, should actually communicate what they're doing in terms of that framework. And as somebody pointed out to me, if you want to attack this problem in a different way and you want all of the controls, let's say, you're going to give up access to a system inside your environment, but you really don't want somebody to be there for a long time, and you want to stop living off the land and all of that, you can actually take and do controls that detect or prevent it straight up and down an attack framework, this column. You can decide just to attack all of those, and you're going to prioritize those in testing. Do that. Tell me how it works. But you've got to create the process to actually do it. And then align, these controls against the test schedule. So one of the things, and this does get probably too much for many, but many of the airlines, right, share about the same kind of metrics. So let's say there's anywhere from 200 to 500 applications that need to run, be successful to keep operations of the environment running. That's a lot. But you've got to actually take the time to figure out what the release schedules are in all of those, because that matters the frequency of the testing. And so when you do that, don't wait too long, too many releases before you do a test. Because if you do, you're taking a big bet. And more than likely, it could be a place where something falls short and all of a sudden you're not alerted. So make sure that you map out release schedules associated with that, including network environments, right? And we're all constantly changing. Don't be afraid to actually make changes. Man, I don't know, but I got hooked on Drive to Survive. And I'm not going to talk about whether you're a Max fan or a Lewis fan, but I love the way that the teams work. And, you know, standing there watching these guys and the way you can use a lot of different like mental images, but just the ability for everybody to practice, like to be able to run these tests. I'll tell you one of the other things I think, and I'll let others kind of opine later on down the line, but one of the best things that I think I did for the blue team at the last organization was to basically set up daily threat hunts. And that allowed the blue team members to have a chance to see how their tools are used. There's no better way, besides teaching, there's no better way to actually see how the thing that you're maintaining is supposed to work or what the value is in it until you actually have to use it to do something like hunt for a threat. And so I think the ability to actually see that. And so when we talk about like, and I know that there's certain companies out there talking about this, but we have red teams and the blue teams and they've been separate. The more that we can move those together, maybe what they're calling purple teaming, the more that you can move those together and integrate them, the better value you're going to have. And the red team does not want to do the same tests over and over again. So they will help with automation. I'm going to pause here. We have 10 minutes. If anybody has any questions, fire away. Let's use this time because, and I want you to argue with any of these points because I'd love to hear that. Yes.
Start out with your supposition that all controls deteriorate over time. The controls necessary to onboard a new employee and give them security awareness training might be an exception. So I think you're forgetting that there are controls in the industry, controls within your organization, but they're not technical controls, they're procedural controls. They're extremely important controls for risk management. They don't necessarily deteriorate over time.
They don't? So let me ask you a question. Huh? Oh, he's saying that not all controls deteriorate over time. One of those examples that he gave was onboarding of an employee. So with respect to onboarding an employee, let's take a industry term that's nonsensical and I stick my fingers in my ears, zero trust. What's it based on? It's based on least privilege, least service. Those two things have been around for a couple thousand years. Okay, so when you onboard somebody, what is supposed to happen? They're supposed to be given access to the things that are necessary to do their job. How many people have seen an automated process created which maintains efficacy over time to just those two principles? Time and time again, I have evidence in large organizations where that process has failed and we didn't know it. And so it might not be just as simple as a blocking, or it might not just be as simple as seeing whether an event is created, but sometimes it can be, does the report, which goes to the approver, the data owner, the manager, show the access necessary for that person to do their job? And that becomes a validation point. And to your argument, there are processes that are well automated, like onboarding in some organizations, where they don't break down. But what I found is that every time I think that that's the case, and I don't check up, eventually I'm burned.
You'll notice I mentioned the assignment of privileges, I mentioned the giving of the onboarding security awareness test.
Yeah, I mean, whether I mean, security awareness testing, that's a kind of a different subject in the efficacy of, but the onboarding, what I like to do is when you think about onboarding though, I would basically say that if you are trying to limit onboarding to a single task, then maybe, but that's not how I think about onboarding, and that's not how we think about onboarding. Onboarding is like one of the more critical components, just as much as job change. And so it takes a lot of very specific processes in there. And even maybe baffles me today how we can have a first-class petty officer have access to data that just seems like shouldn't have access to, right? And so that might be a breakdown in some of these processes that we know should have been in place.
The second thing I wanted to challenge you on is this testing framework that you're proposing, which I think is a phenomenal idea, is a metrics framework. So what you're proposing is that we measure the effectiveness of our controls against our goals. That is exactly what metrics is.
I think the metrics part, to me, agree, I see it as a byproduct. Honestly, what I was getting at and what I think is missing is formalized testing against past investment, because we have examples, all of us do, where we thought something was working and it ends up not working in the future. Go ahead.
Yeah, based on what you just said, at least in government, maybe not private, that's why you have assessment and authorization, at least every 3 years, or annual controls assessments, target assessments based on change that happens law in your environment. So you are hopefully testing effectively through creating scenarios so that you know that those controls are in place at different times throughout its life cycle.
That's true, but think about how detailed it needs to be when you get into the technical side. I'm not saying, I think I've always worked with quality people, but I can tell you that if there's a release cycle on a firewall or a network or a change, and it's once a week, I've seen a rule go in 1 week and be broken in the next week. The frequency that I'm talking about is like, these are exponential curves. So you can't address exponential curves on very, very detailed, large number of controls with process like that. I think you actually have to have automated testing, and it requires a lot of work. So what I'm proposing, by the way, is not cheap. It takes human labor and time. I'm just telling you that in my past, I have seen a benefit from it if you could formalize this. Just in case it's recorded. No, go ahead.
Real quick, Tim, you had a great slide that said these are the macro factors that contribute to the algorithm or the value for that control degradation process, or velocity, I guess is the word.
Yeah.
At a macro level, is the benefit of knowing that, on the Tim degradation curve, this organization is an 8 versus a 6. The so what is it to drive investment, to make management aware that, for example, number of applications, frequency of release, pace of change, et cetera, means we have a really high degradation score, and therefore investment should be directed differently? Like, what's the punchline to the purse holder?
The punchline to the purse holder is that we, security people, will accommodate what it takes for this business to move forward and be successful. But if you require a high rate of change, we're going to have a high rate of testing. We're going to have investment. And so you're going to have to factor in that cost in your cost value analysis with respect to building out new feature, adding a new application, having a new whatever. You have to give us time to test. You have to give us time to actually maintain the investment in the past. And so if you put it in and it becomes a requirement, and by the way, I'm going to actually argue that this needs to be into frameworks. If it's in there in compliance, then we have the ability to actually budget for it. So yes, sorry, good question.
So I do think this is a laudable goal, but dealing with Fortune 100s, larger, smaller, cost is obviously a huge concern. This speaks to me as just a ton more money. So what's the return on investment? Because I don't know many blue teams that are sitting around with excess capacity looking for stuff to do. And as we're becoming more complex, we need higher levels of specialization. Generalists don't work. So now you either build a very big capacity that sits around, or you go with vendors that are going to charge you a ton. And I'm with a vendor, so no disclosure there.
Okay.
So
duly
if you're
noted.
going to pitch it to the board, what's the return on investment? If this costs me $10 million a year to implement to avoid a once in 5 year risk event that's $20 million, I'm probably not going to do it as a board, right?
You want
Like,
me-
how do you articulate that? Because I just
I
see
will.
cost.
I got a very simple answer to
Awesome,
that.
great.
Here's the simple answer. Look at the retrospectives associated with the incidents in the past and see how many of them actually were caused in part due to something that failed. We didn't detect it because the log stream was broken down. We didn't detect it because our tripwire got undermined by an allow rule above it. Look at the past events that you've had and see if it's not due to a breakdown. And if you see it due to a breakdown, then the justification is that it's not about berating the people who actually maintain these systems or to slow things down. It's about increasing frequency of testing associated with an automated tool. The cost is to build the emulation, modify the emulation plan one time. You have to have multiple tests. But at that point, then it just gets scheduled to run. So it becomes a detection, not for intrusion, it becomes a detection for human mistake.
Extending this concept,
Yeah.
once you build in the automated testing, it's going to start to degrade from the day that you do it, which means now the skill set to keep that up to date, you either have to outsource it to a vendor or organically go back to the staff.
It's two sides. Real quick though, it's real quick. It can't deteriorate or lose its efficacy with respect to blocking an intrusion which you're emulating. It can only deteriorate with respect to, because it still should be blocked. You should still have log events as the byproduct of the test. If it's not testing a control that's necessary. So your cost to maintain is not to change this or modify this, it's to add a new test. These tests are very small. They can be very, very small because they should fail in many times, or they should create an alert or an event, or it should be in a report. It's about creating new ones associated with your threat hunt. So what your threat hunt team does is they hunt, they detect, they don't detect, they see what's necessary to block, and then that becomes just an extension of that process where they create or modify an emulation plan. Sorry, stop. Thank you.